With the announcement by Metropolitan Anastasi in 1964 of his retirement, Archbishop John became a leading candidate to succeed him as Metropolitan and Chief Hierarch of the Russian Church abroad. On the second ballot, he was one of the two candidates, with the difference of a single vote between them. To resolve the equal division of the bishops, that night Vladika asked the youngest of the hierarchs, Bishop Filaret, to his quarters, and there he persuaded this unexpected candidate to accept the awesome responsibility of this office. The next day he withdrew his own candidacy and recommended the election of Bishop Filaret, whom the bishops elected unanimously. Seeing in this sudden turn of events the grace of the Holy Spirit, to such eminence among the hierarchs of the Russian Church was Vladika raised before the end of his earthly life. It was an eminence based not on any external qualities, for Vladika was frail, bent, without ambition or guile, unable even to speak clearly. It was an eminence based solely on those inner spiritual qualities which made of him unquestionably one of the great Orthodox hierarchs of this century, and a holy man. In him righteousness shone. 5. Among those who knew and loved Vladika, the first response to the news of his sudden death was, "It cannot be," and this was more than a reaction to the suddenness of the event. For among those who were close to him there had unaccountably developed the notion that this pillar of the Church, this holy man who was always accessible to his flock, would never cease to be. There would never be a time when one would not be able to turn to him for advice and consolation. In one sense, in a spiritual sense, this has since turned out to be true, but it is also one of the realities of this world that every man who lives must die. Vladika was prepared for this reality. While others expected of him many more years of fruitful service to the Church of Christ, for he was a relatively young hierarch, he was readying himself for an end which he had foreseen at least for some months, and the very day of which he apparently knew in advance. To the manager of the orphanage where he lived, he had spoken in the spring of 1966 of a diocesan meeting to be held 3 years later. He indicated, "I will not be here then." In May 1966, a woman who had known Vladika for 12 years, and whose testimony, according to Metropolitan Filaret, is worthy of complete confidence, was amazed to hear him say, "I will die soon," at the end of June, not in San Francisco but in Seattle. Metropolitan Filaret himself testifies of Vladika's extraordinary final farewell to him when returning to San Francisco from the last session of the Synod, which he attended in New York. After the Metropolitan had served the customary Moleben before traveling, Vladika, instead of sprinkling his own head with holy water, as is always done by hierarchs, bent low and asked the Metropolitan to sprinkle him, and after this, instead of the usual mutual kissing of hands, Vladika firmly took the Metropolitan's hand and kissed it, withdrawing his own. See Orthodox Russia 1966, number 18. Again, on the evening before his departure for Seattle, 4 days before his death, Vladika astonished a man for whom he had just served a Moleben with the words, "You will not kiss my hand again," and on the day of his death, at the conclusion of the Divine Liturgy which he celebrated, he spent 3 hours in the altar praying, emerging not long before his death, which occurred at 3:50 p.m. on July 2nd, June 19th, Old Style, 1966. He died in his room in the parish building next to the church, without preparatory signs of any illness or affliction. He was heard to fall, and having been placed in a chair by those who ran to help him, breathed his last peacefully and with little evident pain, in the presence of the miracle-working Kursk icon of the sign. Thus was Vladika found worthy to imitate the blessed death of his patron, St. John of Tobolsk. Today Archbishop John reposes in a chapel in the basement of the San Francisco Cathedral, and there a new chapter has begun in the story of this holy man. Just as St. Seraphim of Sarov told his spiritual children to regard him as living after his death, and to come to his grave and tell him what was in their hearts, so our Vladika also has proved to be hearing those who revere his memory. Soon after his death, a one-time student of his, Father Ambrosi P., saw one night a dream or a vision, he could not tell which. Vladika, clad in Easter vestments, full of light and shining, was censing the cathedral, and joyfully uttered to him just one word while blessing him, "Happy." Later, before the end of the 40-day period, Father Constantine Z, long Vladika's deacon and now a priest, who had lately been angry at Vladika and had begun to doubt his righteousness, saw Vladika in a dream, all in light, with rays of light shining around his head so brightly that it was impossible to look at them. Thus were Father Constantine's doubts of Vladika's holiness dispelled. Many others have seen Archbishop John in unusual dreams that have a particular significance or message. Some affirm that supernatural help has been granted them. The modest grave chapel, soon to be adorned with icons by Pimen Sofronov in remembrance of Vladika, is the witness already of how many tears, confessions, heartfelt requests. The manager of the St. Tikhon Zadonsky home and long a devoted servant of Vladika, M.A. Shakhmatova, saw a remarkable dream. A crowd of people carried Vladika in a coffin into St. Tikhon's church. Vladika came to life and stood in the royal doors anointing the people and saying to her, "Tell the people, although I have died, I am alive." It is yet too early to be able even to grasp the fact that we, cold and sinful, living in this evil age, have been witnesses of such a glorious phenomenon, the life and death of a saint. It is as if the times of Holy Russia have returned to earth, as if to prove the fact that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8. Amen. Eugene Rose, 1966. Chapter 3, Childhood, 1896 to 1911. The birthplace of Archbishop John was the warm, blossoming land of the Kharkov region in southern Russia. Here, in the estate of Adamovka, in the illustrious noble family of Maximovitch, on June 4, 1896, a son was born to the parents Boris and Glafira. In holy baptism he was named Michael, in honor of the Holy Archangel of God. From of old the Maximovitch family had been famous throughout Russia for its piety and patriotism. The most illustrious member of this family was a saint glorified by the Church, the Holy Hierarch John, Metropolitan of Tobolsk, a well-known spiritual writer and poet, translator of the Heliotropion, or coordination of the human will with the divine will, missionary to Siberia, who sent the first Orthodox mission to China, and who, especially after his repose, poured forth a multitude of miracles for the faithful. He was canonized in 1916, and his incorrupt relics are preserved even to this day in Tobolsk. Although the Holy Hierarch John died at the beginning of the 18th century, yet his spirit rested on his distant nephew, who was to receive his name in monasticism, and the young Michael, or Misha as he was called for short, from earliest childhood was a remarkable boy. Misha's grandfather on his father's side was a prominent landowner of the area, and his grandfather on his mother's side was a doctor in Kharkov. His father held a position of leadership among the nobility, and his uncle, his father's brother, who edited the Heliotropion of St. John of Tobolsk, was rector of the University of Kiev. A similar worldly career seemed to be in store for the boy Michael also. His relationship to his parents was always excellent, and he took their opinions into serious consideration as long as they lived. They died in Venezuela, his mother in 1952, and his father in 1954. As a boy, Misha Maximovitch was sickly and ate little. He was very quiet and gentle. He strove to be on good terms with everyone, but he had no especially close friends. He loved animals, and dogs in particular. He did not like noisy children's games, and was often in a very pensive frame of mind. The outstanding characteristic of his childhood was his deep religiousness, which he manifested in ways far beyond his years. In his sermon on being consecrated bishop in 1934, he himself said, "From the first days when I began to become aware of myself, I wished to serve righteousness and truth. My parents kindled in me a striving to stand unwaveringly for the truth, and my soul was captivated by the example of those who had given their lives for it." Young Misha loved to play monastery, dressing toy soldiers as monks and making toy forts into monasteries. As he grew older, his religious fervor deepened. He collected icons and religious and historical books, amassing a large library, and he loved above all to read the lives of saints. At night he would stand for a long time at prayer. Being the oldest child, he had a great influence on his 4 brothers and 1 sister, who knew the lives of saints and the facts of Russian history through him. He was very demanding of himself and others in keeping the Church's laws and national customs. From his earliest years he was a fervent Russian patriot, and he instilled in others also a reverence for Russia and its history. His love extended likewise to all the Slavic and Orthodox peoples, and in 1912, when the Serbs were betrayed by the Bulgarians, in righteous indignation he removed the pictures of the Bulgarian king from the younger children's scrapbooks and sealed up the family's phonograph record of the Bulgarian national anthem so that it could not be played. Misha's holy and righteous childhood greatly impressed his French Catholic governess, and it was under his influence that she was baptized Orthodox when the boy was 15 years old. He helped to prepare her for baptism and taught her how to pray. He took an active part in church life, and every year he would participate in the procession of the wonder-working Ozeryansk icon of the Most Holy Mother of God from Kharkov to the Ozeryansk Monastery. The Maximovitch country estate in Barevali was located only 8 miles from the famous Svyatogorsk Monastery. The family spent every summer at their estate, and young Misha would sleep outdoors in a tent. The family had great reverence for the monastery and spent much time there. It can be imagined what awe and fervor was inspired in Misha's eager heart when he came as a pilgrim to this remarkable monastery, which was situated on a forested bank of the northern Donets. It had an Athonite typicon, majestic churches, a high Mount Tabor, many caves, schema monks, skeets, and a large brotherhood of 600 monks, enough to inflame the zeal of any young lover of the lives of saints. Misha, a monk from childhood, was immensely impressed, and he would often come to the monastery by himself. When he was 11 years old, Misha was sent to the Poltava Cadet Corps military academy, which his father had attended. Here he continued to be quiet and religious, and not at all like a soldier. He did well in all subjects, and liked them all, with the exception of physical education, from which he was excused in his last years. During these years away from home, which usually are so crucial for young impressionable souls, he could not avoid meeting the new Poltava bishop, who struck the whole town with his severe asceticism. Bishop Theophan Bistrov was short in stature, very thin, transparent as people used to describe him. He served with closed eyes in almost motionless stillness and evoked a deep feeling of spirituality. It seemed as though an icon of a saint came down from the frescoed walls of the cathedral and walked amidst the faithful. He spoke very softly, always in a state of concentrated prayer, yet quite accessible, especially to the youth. It is interesting to note that there was a strong similarity in Blessed John's late years, as if Hierarch Theophan was his model of an ascetic prelate that had so deeply impressed him since childhood. While he was attending the cadet corps at the age of 13, Misha was guilty of a serious breach of conduct, which is extremely revealing of his character as a boy. The cadet would often march formally in the city of Poltava, and in 1909, on the occasion of the 200th anniversary of the Russian victory in the Battle of Poltava, they were marching with special solemnity. As they passed by the front of the Poltava Cathedral, Cadet Michael turned toward the cathedral and made the sign of the cross. The boys laughed, and later they mocked him for this, and he was disciplined by the authorities for it. Finally, the Grand Prince Konstantin Konstantinovich, patron of the corps, whose son was a fellow cadet of Misha's, issued the order that Cadet Michael Maximovitch was not to be punished for an act which, far from being reprehensible and deserving of censure, was most praiseworthy and revealed sound religious feelings. Misha, from an object of ridicule, became a hero. In 1914, Michael graduated from the Cadet Corps, and following the deep desire of his heart, wished then to attend the Kiev Theological Academy. His parents insisted, however, that he attend law school in Kharkov, and out of obedience to them, he put away his own desire and began to prepare for a career in law. It was during his university years that the Orthodox education and outlook which he had received in his childhood came to maturity in the youth Michael. At an age when some boys who are raised unconsciously Orthodox are rebelling or even discarding the fairy tales of their religious upbringing, young Michael understood the point of this upbringing. He saw that the lives of saints in particular contain a profound wisdom which is unsuspected by those who read them superficially, and that the proper knowledge of them is more more important than any university course. And so it was, as his classmates noticed, that Michael spent more time reading the lives of the saints than attending academic lectures, although he did very well in his university studies also. He studied the Orthodox saints precisely on the university level. He assimilated their world outlook and their orientation toward life, entered into their psychology, studied the variety of their activity and ascetic labors and practice of prayer. He came to love them with all his heart, was thoroughly penetrated by their spirit, and began to live like them. While studying the worldly sciences, he said in the sermon mentioned above, "I went all the more deeply into the study of the science of sciences, into the study of the spiritual life." He put all his efforts into this, and his spiritual eyes became fully open, and his soul was wounded with the thirst to acquire the true meaning and path of life in Christ. The boy Michael came to the age of a man and finished his university studies just as the fearful revolution was beginning its course with the intent to subject the whole world to anti-Christianity. His whole family was intensely loyal to the Orthodox Tsar, and for it, the very first days of the February Revolution in 1917 were days of mourning. Michael, now thoroughly penetrated with the principles of Orthodox life, according to the example of God's saints, was especially bold in continuing to live by the standard of Orthodox sanctity, even in the midst of the new conditions of life. Thus, at a church meeting in Kharkov, there was talk of taking down a silver bell in the cathedral belfry and melting it. The vast majority, caught up in the revolutionary spirit, or fearful of opposing it, were in favor of this sacrilege, and only Michael and a very few others dared to speak out boldly against this. As the revolutionary spirit spread and the arrests began, his boldness became very dangerous, and his family tried to persuade him to leave home and hide himself. He only replied that there is nowhere to hide from God's will. Without God's will, nothing happens. Not one hair falls from our head. He was arrested, then released after a month. After a short time, he was arrested again, but when it was seen that he seemed not to care whether he was free or in prison, he was soon released again. Already he quite literally lived in another world, and he simply refused to conform to the reality that governs the lives of most men. He had resolved to follow unwaveringly the path of God's law. Thus the seed of true orthodoxy planted in his childhood took deep root in the soil of the heart of this chosen one of God, and his knowledge and love of the different kinds of saints prepared his soul to become, as it were, a wondrous new plant, with marvelous and varied fruits seldom to be seen together in one person. As his later life revealed, he was at one and the same time a stern ascetic and a loving pastor, a feeder of orphans and unmercenary healer, and a missionary and apostle, a profound theologian and a fool for Christ's sake, a true shepherd of his banished Russian flock, and a hierarch of universal significance. Father Herman, 1979. Chapter 4. Teacher at the Bitol Seminary, Yugoslavia, 1929 to 1934. Reminiscences of a Seminarian. Remember your instructors who have spoken unto you the word of God, and considering their end, follow their faith. Hebrews 13:7. Almost 5 decades have flown by since the appearance at Bitol Seminary of a very modest monk. This was young hieromonk John Maximovitch, who was Russian by origin. His outward appearance was not striking, but nonetheless was a little special. He was a man of medium stature with thick black hair, which covered his shoulders. His face was without a single wrinkle. His large eyes, which appeared as if looking out from the hair. He had not yet grown much beard. His nose was straight, but his lower jaw, as if taut, was an impediment to his speech. His right leg was shorter than the other, and he wore a prosthetic shoe which tapped as he walked, especially when he walked along the corridor or in the classroom. Often he used a cane. This is the way he appeared among us in the school year of 1928. No one realized with what fullness the Holy Spirit dwelt within him. Undoubtedly, by God's providence, he was indispensable at that time to the Bitol Seminary, which in its boarding school had from 400 to 500 students. Many students on scholarships lived in the boarding school until the 4th year of school, until they were given the possibility to choose either to finish seminary or go to some other school, retaining their scholarships. As a result, there were many students from different schools, most of whom were seminarians. There were many Albanians, fewer Russians and Czechs, 6. From morning until evening it buzzed like a beehive. Among these youths and boys began to work this holy man, who, with struggle, prayer, and warm Christian love, created new people. Ascetic struggler. With the appearance of a new teacher among students, the question always arises, what will he be like? Will he be strict or kind, etc.? Probably there were these questions in relation to Father John, but he, by his personal example, very quickly answered that he was strictest with himself. How many were his daily labors at prayer and prostrations, only God knows, but we could only partly see and feel. The Bishop of Ohrid, Nikolai Velimirovich, often visited the seminary and spoke with the teachers and students. For us, his meeting with Father John was unusual. After mutual prostrations, there was an unusually cordial, loving conversation. Once before parting, he turned to a small group of students, of whom I was one, with these words, "Children, listen to Father John. He is an angel of God in human form." We ourselves became convinced that this was the correct characterization of him. His life was angelic. One can rightly say that he belonged more to heaven than to earth. His meekness and humility were like that recorded in the lives of the greatest ascetics and desert dwellers. He ate only that amount of food which was indispensable to sustaining his body. His clothing was simple, and a bed he did not need. His room was situated on the basement level. It had one window without curtains, which looked into the depths of the courtyard. In his room was an ordinary table with a chair, and a bed on which he never lay. On his table always lay the Holy Gospel, and on a shelf stood the service books. That was all. At all times of the night he would be seen reading the Bible, because his will is rather in the law of the Lord, and in his law will he meditate day and night. Psalm 1:2. The way in which he experienced all the church services and prayers is impossible to convey in words. His preparations for Holy Liturgy were extraordinary. From Thursday onwards he took less food. On Friday and Saturday he hardly ate, until on Sunday he served liturgy. The first week of Great Lent he did not eat, but every second day he served, likewise also during Passion Week. When Great Saturday arrived, his body was completely exhausted, but on the day of Christ's resurrection he was revivified. After Divine Liturgy his strength returned. Angelic joy lit his face. In this way his ascetic life passed before our eyes. A man of prayer with an extraordinary memory. Father John was a unique man of prayer. He was so absorbed in the meaning of the text of the prayers that the impression was created that he was talking with God, the most holy Theotokos, the angels, and the saints. They were present to his spiritual eyes. It may be that for our benefit he spoke aloud to teach us how to pray. Every one of his prayers were vibrant. He spoke from memory with special expression. It is not known how many prayers he knew by heart. For him this was no miracle, because he had a great gift from God, an unusual memory. This was discovered by all of us students as well as by all the teachers. Events from the Holy Gospel he knew as though he saw them before his own eyes, and he knew the chapter where they were to be found. When necessary, he could even quote the verse. He knew the character and peculiarities of every student, so that he could immediately tell when and how each student answered, what he knew and didn't know. All this he did without any notes. After many verifications, no one could doubt his exceptional memory. Mutual love. Father John loved us all, and we him. In our eyes he was the embodiment of all Christian virtues, quiet, calm, gentle. He glowed before our eyes. We saw in him no deficiency, even in the way he spoke. We quickly grew accustomed to that. He became for us so close that we considered him an older brother, loved and esteemed. There was no conflict, personal or public, which he could not resolve. There was no question without an answer. It was sufficient that someone pose a question on the street, and he would immediately answer. If the question was rather important, he would answer it before a large gathering, after service in church, in class, or in the cafeteria. The answer was always concentrated, clear, full, and knowledgeable, because he was a highly learned man, having acquired 2 university degrees, theology and law. He daily and nightly prayed for us. Every night, like a guardian angel, he watched over us. For one he adjusted a pillow, for another a blanket. Always, upon entering or leaving the room, he blessed us with the sign of the cross. Teacher. Finally, let us see what sort of teacher he was. He taught by a plan, a special method. He was at once a theorist and a practitioner. He combined practice and theory skillfully. Because of this, his subjects were retained without excessive reading. Let's recall, for instance, liturgics with church rules. He had a schedule by which students read in the kleros. One group of 4 students and another, altogether 8 students, had to appear at the appointed time in Father John's room, where all the service books were to be found. The first 4 students had to find everything that should be read or sung on that day or feast day. The next 4 students listened. At this time, the theory and symbolism of action, etc., was explained. In this way, they practiced the entire year. In class, the theory was emphasized. He demanded constant vigilance everywhere, especially during services. He wanted to attract students so that they would especially pay attention to the Holy Gospel as the source of all theological knowledge. Because of this, at the beginning of the lesson, he asked what had been read that day from the Holy Gospel and Epistle. Everyone had to know because no one knew whom he would ask. After this, he would give short explanations. What splendid explanations he gave when dealing with the subject of pastoral theology and the history of the Christian Church. Some lectures on pastoral theology he wrote in special notebooks for us. In all of them he expressed himself best. By his convictions, the priest is shown by the Apostle Paul as an ideal pastor who must be an example for the faithful in word, in life, in spirit, in faith, in purity. 1 Timothy 4:12. A priest is the spiritual father of his parish. He must act in this way. His parish is a large family, which cannot exist without pastoral love and daily prayer. Wherever possible, he must come to help in order to partake of their joy and their sorrow. These are Father John's main thoughts, which he explained in all his teachings. Lessons on the history of the Christian Church likewise were well imprinted, because Father John knew how to select the most important points, often repeating until everyone remembered. When, in the year 1931, we were taking examinations for a certificate of graduation, Professor Dmitry Stefanovich, in the position of representative of the ministry, was amazed by the excellent answers of the students. I think more than half the students answered excellently, and the rest were very good. There were no poor grades. The teachers explained to the representative of the ministry that Father John was inseparable from his students, and during the whole year explained everything to the last detail. And so Father John, by his exceptional personality, delved into the soul of each student. He was among us like one sent by God, delegated to work in his wide cornfield. He honestly performed this, his mission, in my generation. These memoirs refer to the period of time between 1928 and 1931. He stayed in the seminary until his election as Bishop of Shanghai. Because of this, I consider my memoirs incomplete. Archpriest John Maximovitch. Chapter 5. Wonderworker of Shanghai. In 1934, Hieromonk John of the Milkovo Monastery in Yugoslavia was consecrated bishop and sent to head the flock of Russian exiles in Shanghai. Here he soon became known as a loving pastor who gave himself entirely to his flock, refusing help to no one, and as a holy man whose prayer worked miracles. Later, with the approach of the communists, by his intercessions with several governments, and by his unceasing prayers, he rescued almost his entire flock, leading it through the Philippines to America and freedom. To this day, most Russians who know him remember him as Vladika John of Shanghai. The following are but a few of the many accounts that relate to this period of his life, and that demonstrate beyond any doubt the power of his prayer with God. 1. Once in Shanghai, Vladika John was asked to the bed of a dying child, whose case had been called hopeless by the physicians. Entering the apartment, Vladika John went straight to the room in which the sick boy lay, although no one had managed yet to show him where this was. Without examining the child, Vladika immediately fell down in front of the icon in the corner, which was very characteristic of him, and prayed for a long time. Then, assuring the relatives that the child would recover, he quickly left, and in fact the child became better towards morning, and he soon recovered, so that a physician was no longer needed. An eyewitness, Colonel N.N. Nikolaev, confirms this account in all detail. Dr. A.F. Baranov, Erie, Pennsylvania. 2. Archbishop John has departed into the heavenly church. Now, praying for the repose of his righteous soul, one is involuntarily reminded of the words of the gospel. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. Luke 6:45. Everyone who had the opportunity to have close contact with Hierarch John will say with sincerity that the hierarch always bore these words in his heart. Once he told me, prayer is the foundation of the success of archpastoral activity. In the course of the day, one must spend 6 hours conducting church services, 6 hours contemplating on God, 6 hours doing good deeds, and 6 hours resting. He performed precisely that which would make him unusually firm, deeply humble and penetrating. The hierarch spent a lot of energy on children and young people. Thus he founded the orphanage of St. Tikhon of Zadonsk, frequented all Russian educational institutions, constantly visited all classes of religious instruction, and personally conducted all examinations on that subject in all schools. An especially difficult task was the upbringing of the orphan children of the St. Tikhon of Zadonsk orphanage. He always used to say that the hardest emotional difficulties the orphans have are before great holidays like Christmas Eve and before Pascha, when the orphans see how Christian families prepare themselves for the feast days, how fathers and mothers take care of their children, and they see that they don't have that. He always strove to be to them both father and mother. The kind hierarch, while raising children in a strictly religious manner, would at the same time make Christmas tree parties, plays, and even acquired horns and wind instruments, resulting in a quite good brass orchestra. But of special joy for him was when the young people would gather for the fellowship of St. Joseph of Belgorod, where lectures used to be conducted on religious and philosophic topics and Bible study. Young men and women, the members of the St. Tikhon of Zadonsk orphanage, used to love Archbishop John to such an extent that they never felt they were orphans. They knew that they had a strong protector, their spiritual father, who would not allow anyone to hurt them in this earthly life of man. To depict in full the inward life of the ascetic of prayer and pastoral work of Archbishop John is difficult indeed. We can testify only in part. Remembering, however, his archpastoral deeds as an Orthodox man of prayer and an ascetic, we see in reality the power of the words of the holy apostle James. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Archimandrite Benjamin Garshin, Australia, 1966. 3. Your Grace, we have read the booklet published in California concerning the life and activity of the ever-memorable Archbishop John Maximovitch, formerly of Shanghai. I am Maria Petrovna Prigorovskaya, now Radionova, a former teacher of the Commercial College in Shanghai, and I know 2 cases of serious illnesses which were healed by the prayers of Vladika John. 1. Unfortunately, I do not remember the year, month, or day when in the orphanage of St. Tikhon of Zadonsk, which was founded by Vladika John, a 6 or 7-year-old girl suddenly became ill. Towards night she had a very high temperature, and she cried out from pain. About midnight she was sent to the hospital of the Russian Orthodox Brotherhood. The doctor, who was called D.I. Kazakov, now reposed, found in the girl a twisting of the intestines, volvulus. Other doctors, as well as the mother of the girl, were also called. After an examination and consultation, the doctors announced to the mother that the condition of her daughter was hopeless, and even an operation might be fatal. The mother nonetheless asked them to save the girl and perform the operation, and she herself, being a religious woman, went immediately at night to Vladika John, who lived in a house near the cathedral, not far from the hospital. Vladika John, who did not lie down on a bed at night, immediately received her and listened to her fervent request to pray for and save her only daughter. Vladika summoned the mother to the cathedral, opened the royal gates, and began to pray before the altar table, while the mother, standing on her knees in front of the iconostasis, likewise fervently prayed for her daughter. This continued for a long time, and it was already dawn when Vladika John, having finished praying, went up to the mother, blessed her, and told her to go home, for her daughter would be alive and well. The mother, encouraged, hastened, not home, but to the hospital. There she met Dr. D.I. Kazakov, who told her that the operation had proceeded successfully, and added that he had never seen such a case in his practice. He was a very religious man, and added that only God could have helped through her fervent prayer. Then the mother said that she had just come from Vladika John, who had been praying together with her in the cathedral. Within a few days the girl was released from the hospital. The whole of Shanghai knew about this miraculous recovery of health. 2. Likewise, I do not remember the date. A former teacher of our commercial college became ill. He was taken to the hospital of the Russian Orthodox Brotherhood, where the doctors diagnosed a dangerous appendicitis and told his wife that he could die any minute. Dr. Ogilvy declared that even an operation would not help, and he might die during the operation. His wife was in despair. She remembered Vladika John, who had saved the girl by his prayers, and she went to him. Vladika knew the sick man well. The wife told him about the condition of her sick husband and asked him to pray for him. Vladika, having listened to her, calmed her and said that he would go to the hospital right away, and he added that the life of a man is not in the hands of doctors, but in the hands of God, and he sent her home. She was a teacher at the girls' high school in Shanghai. Vladika John went to the hospital. He went up to the bed of the sick man, placed his hands on the man's head, prayed for a long time, and then blessed him and left. When the wife came to the hospital to see the sick man, Nurse Kornilova, on meeting her, told her that an extraordinary thing had happened. Towards morning, in going through the wards, she had come to her husband and seen that he was sitting up in bed. She raised the sheet in order to put him back in bed, and she saw that the sheet on which he was sitting was all covered with pus and blood. The appendix had burst outwards and drenched the sheet. This was an extraordinary thing. The doctors affirmed that there had never been such a case in their practice, and when they found out about Vladika's visit and his prayer over the sick man, they understood that a miracle had occurred by the prayers of our dear Vladika, who was always a man of prayer for us. The sick man did not even remember that Vladika had been to see him and had prayed for him. After his release from the hospital, he and his wife had a moleben of thanksgiving served, and they thanked Vladika for his prayers. Maria P. Radionova, October 5, 1971, Australia. 4. In the Philippines, being leader of the church region where the church was located, and where the priests, nuns, and Vladika lived, I sometimes accompanied Vladika to the city of Guyan, where in a Philippine hospital there were seriously ill Russians whom Vladika visited, handing out pocket-sized gospels and small icons. One such trip, on entering the Russian ward, we heard terrible screams coming to us from afar. To Vladika's question as to the reason of these screams, the Russian nurse replied that they came from a hopelessly sick woman who, since she disturbed the patients with her screaming, had been placed in the former American military hospital which adjoined this building. Vladika immediately decided to go to the sick woman, but the Russian nurse advised him not to go, as a sickening smell came from her. That doesn't mean anything, Vladika said, and with quick strides he went to the sick woman in the next building. I followed him. In fact, there was an unpleasant odor coming from the sick woman. Going up to her, Vladika put a cross on her head and began to pray. I went out. Vladika prayed for a long time, and then confessed the sick woman and gave her Holy Communion. When we left, she was no longer screaming, but only groaning softly. Some time passed. On another such trip to the hospital, we had hardly entered the courtyard in a jeep when a woman came running out of the hospital and threw herself at Vladika's feet. It was the hopelessly sick woman for whom Vladika had prayed. G. Laren, Sydney, Australia. 5. In 1968, there came to our brotherhood of Father Herman in San Francisco a woman who informed us that her name was Anna Petrovna Lushnikova, and hearing that we were collecting information about Vladika John, she insisted that we immediately, without any delay, write down the following. She related that she was by profession a singing teacher, and that she had once helped Archbishop Dmitri in China very much by her advice on breathing properly while pronouncing words, when his physicians had been powerless to help him. When Vladika John came to the Far East, his unclear diction was noticed immediately by everyone. It was said that he was a stutterer from birth, that he had been wounded in the mouth, etc., but she immediately guessed what was wrong and came to him and offered to help. According to her, Vladika's whole organism was in a state of exhaustion. From weakness, his lower jaw was hanging down and prevented him from pronouncing words clearly. She showed him how to breathe properly, to articulate, and so forth. He began regularly to come to her for exercises, sitting humbly and pronouncing ooh, ah, etc. Out of gratitude, he paid her, always leaving an American $20 bill. Vladika's speech improved. but whenever a fast would come, the defect would again make itself known, and again he would come to her. She tried to help him as much as she could, and seeing in him a man of God, she came to have a great love for him and became his spiritual daughter. In Shanghai in 1945, Anna Petrovna told us, "I was wounded during the war, and I was dying in the French hospital. I knew that I was dying, and I begged people to tell Vladika, so that he would come and give me Holy Communion. It was about 10 or 11 at night, and there was a storm outside with wind and rain. I was in agony and was suffering terribly. At my cries to call Vladika, the doctors and nurses came and said that it was out of the question, and it was wartime, and the hospital was locked up for the night, and I would have to wait until morning. I didn't listen to anything, but only continued to shout, 'Vladika, come, Vladika, come,' and no one could tell him of my wish. Suddenly, in the midst of this storm, I saw in the open door of the ward that Vladika had appeared, all wet, and was coming toward me. Since his arrival was something in the nature of a miracle, I began to feel him to see if he were real, and I asked, 'Or is it your spirit?' He smiled quietly and said, 'Real,' and gave me Holy Communion. Here I fell asleep and slept after this for 18 hours. In the same ward with me there was another patient. She also saw Vladika giving me Holy Communion. After I woke up from my 18-hour sleep, I felt well and said that this was because Vladika had come and given me Holy Communion. But no one believed me, and they said that Vladika couldn't possibly have entered the locked hospital in such a night. I asked my neighbor in the ward, and she confirmed that Vladika had been there, but all the same they didn't believe us. But the fact was apparent. I was alive and felt well. At this time, the nurse who didn't believe me was making my bed, and she discovered, as if to authenticate what I had said, that there was a $20 bill under the pillow, left there by Vladika. He knew that I owed the hospital a great deal, and that I was already in need before that, and so he put the bill there. Later he confirmed that he had put the bill there. From that time on, I got better. Later, in 1961, after a terrible automobile accident, he again gave me Holy Communion in the hospital and healed me. With this, Anna Petrovna finished her story and left, saying how she wished that she could have been buried by Vladika John when she died, and her wish, even after the death of Vladika himself, was in fact fulfilled. Some time passed after our meeting. Coming home after the all-night vigil for the Transfiguration of the Lord, Anna Petrovna died at night from gas fumes in her apartment. On the same night of the Transfiguration, Olga I. Semenyuk, who had been close to Vladika in Shanghai, saw in a dream that Anna Petrovna, dead, was lying in a highly raised coffin in the new cathedral in San Francisco, and Vladika John, in his mantle, was going around her censing and serving her funeral to triumphal choral singing. In the morning, all found out about her sudden death, and then we understood why the Lord had given her the idea to come to us and urgently insist that we write down her testimony of the clairvoyance and wonder-working of Vladika John, who already in that other transfigured world, on the day of the Transfiguration, celebrated her funeral. Reader Gleb Podmashensky, December 1968. Chapter 6. Victim of Envy. The Sufferings Endured by Blessed John in Shanghai. I'm sending you sad news. Last night in L.A., Olga Ivanovna Semenyuk died, who was very close to Archbishop John in Shanghai. Lately, she lived with her son, B. For me, it is a great loss. Pray for her. She used to tell me her reminiscences of days gone by in Shanghai, such things about Archbishop John, which I don't know if you knew, how some people attempted to poison him and almost succeeded, for he was almost gone. The doctors doubted if he would live more than 2 months, and decided upon sending him off as a hopeless case to a resort in Sandow. Blessed John had the habit of having his meal only once a day, late at night. The dinner would be prepared and brought to him. Often he would be so busy in his study and so forgetful that it would get cold. Once Mrs. Olga Semenyuk, whose sons were the bishop's devoted acolytes and were often with him, noticed that the food was not touched by him. She took the plate, warmed the food, and reminded the bishop that it was time to eat. He did not touch it, as if he knew something. Then she repeated the warming several times until she began to notice that the food turned some strange unnatural color, so she threw it away and brought him whatever was left left from their own dinner, which he immediately gladly ate. This incident she recalled after the actual poisoning. The incident in this paragraph was personally told the editor by Olga Semeniuk in 1969. Bishop John did not want to go to Sandow and said, "Let Olga Ivanovna henceforth prepare food for me," which she gladly accepted and always would bring it herself and even stand before him until he would finish. No one touched his food. In 2 months he got well. But once after Paschal liturgy he did not come out from the altar for a long time. When he did, he came out pale as a sheet and began to throw up. The president of the cathedral sisterhood quickly brought a dish and handed it to him. He threw up some strange rose-colored matter. It was from the wine bottle from which he rinsed his chalice after the service. A hole was dug in the garden and it was buried. He was poisoned by a certain priest who later lived in LA during our time and wrote very nasty articles in Russian newspapers. Father Peter T. used to tell much about him. Finally, when he was dying from cancer, Archbishop John went to him in the hospital to release him of his sins, and he repented of his sins before his death. He was a former school teacher in Russia, I think perhaps possessed. Archbishop John used to visit hospitals at night, and the Semeniuk boys accompanied him. In all hospitals they knew him and would open doors to him. The sick ones used to call him without the use of telephone or telegraph. I wrote down some other recollections of Olga Semeniuk. She died in her sleep. What a fortunate one. May God give rest to the faithful servant of God and to Blessed John. Helen Koncevich, 1984. Chapter 7. Apostle to the West, 1951 through 1966. In 1951, Archbishop John was assigned as ruling hierarch of the Western European Archdiocese of the Russian Church outside of Russia. Here, his missionary fervor, firmly grounded on his life of constant prayer and purity of Orthodox doctrine, brought forth abundant fruits. In summing up the meaning of the Russian diaspora, Vladika John wrote in 1938, "In chastising the Russian people, the Lord at the same time showed it the path to salvation by making it a preacher of orthodoxy throughout the entire world." Report to Sobor of 1938, Yugoslavia. But Vladika John himself went far beyond the unconscious preaching of orthodoxy that characterizes most of the Russian diaspora to become a conscious apostle to the Western lands, which, once enlightened by the Christian faith, had now for centuries lain in the darkness of heterodoxy and its even darker offshoots. Vladika showed special concern for the several young movements of return to orthodoxy from Western error, with results that it is yet too early to calculate. For now it may be said that the only Western church with its own bishop and monasteries, the Netherlands Orthodox Church, regards Archbishop John as its founder. The genuine French Orthodox Church today has its own hierarchy thanks to his patronage. The only Spanish Orthodox priest, Madrid Mission, was ordained by him. And as for America, another story in itself, one finds an ever-increasing realization of Archbishop John as a virtual patron saint of authentic American Orthodoxy. Of the great services which the Blessed Archbishop John has rendered to the Orthodoxy of the West, one of the most important concerns the veneration of those early Western saints whose names, owing to the later apostasy of the Church of Rome, were never included in Orthodox calendars. Out of his great love for all the Church's saints, Vladika collected the lives and icons or portraits of the Western saints also, and when by God's providence he was appointed ruling Archbishop of Western Europe, one of his first acts was to establish the proper ecclesiastical foundation for the veneration of these saints in the Orthodox Church. The list of 1952 given below must be understood as a preliminary and very incomplete one. 1. The veneration of local saints. This is the resolution on the question of the veneration of Western saints made by the bishops of the Western European Archdiocese of the Russian Church outside of Russia under the presidency of Archbishop John Maximovitch. The question of the veneration of local saints was considered at the Conference of Bishops, which was held in Geneva on September 16th through 17th, Old Style, 1952, with Archbishop John presiding. At the last Sobor of Bishops of the entire Russian church outside of Russia in 1950 in connection with the question of giving permission for the veneration of Saint Anshar, enlightener of Denmark and Sweden, the Sobor decreed that it should be left up to the local bishops to clarify the question of each local saint separately. With this as a basis, the conference took up this question. Archbishop John related briefly the biography of Saint Anshar, who had his see in Hamburg and Bremen, and from this it is evident that there are no reasons to doubt the sanctity of his life, his apostolic labors, and the miracles from his relics. If the Lord himself has glorified him, it would be brazenness on our part not to revere him as a saint. Vladika considers it essential to acknowledge that Saint Anshar is, in actuality, a God-pleasing saint who was glorified by the Orthodox Church in the West before its falling away from the Catholic Church, and therefore he should be glorified equally with other saints. His memory is celebrated on February 3rd, 865. The name of Saint Anshar should henceforth be introduced into church calendars as a hierarch of the Church. There are a number of other saints in the West who should likewise be glorified equally with those saints who have been glorified by the Orthodox Church in the East, since their veneration was established in profound antiquity. Among such saints are 1. Saint Victor, martyr of Marseille, 304. July 21st, St. John Cassian built a monastery over his tomb in the 5th century. 2. St. Pothinus, predecessor of St. Irenaeus as Bishop of Lyon, martyr, 177, June 2nd. 3. Martyrs of Lyon, Saints Alexander, April 24th, and Epipodius, April 22nd, companions martyred shortly after St. Pothinus. Their relics were long kept together with those of St. Irenaeus, and St. Blandina and others, June 2nd, martyred with St. Pothinus in 177. 4. St. Felician, Bishop of Foligno in Umbria, Italy, martyred 252, January 24th. 5. Saint Genevieve, 512, January 3rd, virgin consecrated to Christ by Saint Germanus of Auxerre, renowned for miracles, patroness of Paris. Saint Germanus of Auxerre, 488, July 31st, bishop, died in Ravenna, freed Britain from the Pelagian heresy. 7. Saint Lupus of Troy, 479, bishop and confessor, went with Saint Germanus to Britain to combat the Pelagian heresy, bishop of Troy for 52 years. 8. Saint Germanus of Paris, 576, May 28th, first an abbot, then bishop of Paris. 9. Saint Clodoald, 560, September 7th, priest and confessor, established a monastery near Paris. 10. Preachers in Ireland, then in France, Switzerland, Italy, etc. St. Columban, 615, November 21st. Abbot, founded many monasteries, including Luxeuil in France and Bobbio in Italy, where he died. St. Fridolin became a monk at Poitiers and spread the veneration of St. Hilary when a missionary in Switzerland and on the Upper Rhine, 7th century, March 6th, and St. Gall, a disciple of St. Columban, a hermit in Switzerland, 646, October 16th. 11. St. Clotilde, Queen of France, 545, June 3rd. By her prayers, her husband Clovis, King of the Franks, received the faith of Christ. 12. St. Hilary of Poitiers, bishop and confessor, led the battle against Arianism in the West, 368, January 13th. 13. St. Honoratus of Lerins, founder of the monastery of Lerins, when Archbishop of Arles, 429, January 16th. 14. St. Vincent of Lerins, teacher of the Church, priest, author of the Commonitorium, 450, May 24th. 15. St. Patrick, enlightener of Ireland, bishop and confessor, ordained bishop by St. Germanus of Auxerre, first to preach Christ in Ireland, 461, March 17th. The following resolution was made concerning the question of the veneration of Western saints, revering the memory of the saints who have pleased God, and finding in the places of our diaspora missionaries and ascetics of antiquity, whose names were not known to us, we glorify the Lord, wondrous in his saints, and venerate those who have pleased him, extolling their suffering and ascetic labors, and calling upon them to be our intercessors and intermediaries with God. In view of this, we establish that the above-mentioned righteous ones be revered by the entire Orthodox Church, and we call upon pastors and flock to revere these saints and to hasten to their intercession of prayer. 2. Blessed John in France. Reminiscences of his spiritual daughter, by Zinaida v. Julim. Editor's preface. The period of Blessed John's life in France has so far been obscure, and not much information about it has been available. A devoted spiritual daughter of his, the author of these memoirs, Zinaida v. Julim, fills in this gap, giving us a view from the inside and disclosing the mystical world of perhaps the holiest man of the 20th century. Surely a prophet of such caliber could not get by without evoking envy and hatred, just as did the prophets of old. But to conceal this righteous man from the view of the thirsting new generation would be a sin, because the glory of God, revealed in the lives of the righteous, serves to enkindle that divine fire, which Christ our Lord wishes to have burning upon this earth. Luke 12:49. The following spiritual portrait of Blessed John comes from a simple, loving heart, guarded by the patristic awareness of sobriety. Realizing that Blessed John was touched by divinity and was in contact with the mind of his Creator, the author was able to peer into the mystery of his sanctity. Although her observations only give us glimpses, they offer clear testimony to the close presence of the other world for which the Holy Orthodox Church prepares its children, and to the ability of God's saints to penetrate that realm even while on earth. That mystery, that revelation beyond our glimpses, remains hidden in God. It is open to those who, like Blessed John, ascend on the wings of divine love for God and their neighbor, and those of us who watch from below are given renewed hope and the inspiration to increase our upward striving. Father Herman. 1. My first meeting. I will begin my account with how I first met Archbishop John. Matushka Helen Dmitrievna Solodovnikova used to tell me many stories about the elders of Optina, and I began to desire to be able to meet one of such elders. At that time I had many difficulties of all kinds, and I was imploring God that he send me such an elder. About the same time, I found out from someone that Father Theodore Bokhach was going to Mount Athos, and I approached him with a request that he asked Father Archimandrite Nicholas, the Abbot of St. Elias Skeet on Mount Athos, to allow me to write to him seeking spiritual direction. But when Father Theodore returned, he informed me that the abbot blessed me to turn with my request to Archbishop John Maximovitch, adding, "You have your own saint, Blessed John." The wife of General Polovtsev, Natalia Ivanovna, our good friend, told me that he often served in Meudon, and that in a few days he would serve and give a talk in Paris. We agreed to go there together. In expectation of the Archbishop, my mother anticipated to see a stately hierarch, like the one she used to see in St. Alexander Nevsky Lavra in Petersburg in Russia. But when she heard that Bishop John had arrived and saw a short, gray-haired elder in a white cassock with an uncovered head, in amazement she loudly exclaimed, "Why, that's dear Seraphim of Sarov." At this he turned in our direction, bent his head a little to one side, and meekly smiled. But Matushka Solodovnikova, when she saw him for the first time earlier in Cannes, as they were vesting him before liturgy in the middle of the church, thought to herself, "What an extraordinary hierarch, and a fool for Christ at that." Suddenly, at this moment, he turned his head back, looked her over from head to foot, and smiled at her. She was shocked at his clairvoyance, and only feared that she might have thought something bad about him. Soon after that, Matushka Solodovnikova and I went to Versailles, to the cadet corps where he was staying. We stood through the whole liturgy, and at the end approached to venerate the cross. The bishop was distributing Antidoron himself. He at once gave Matushka a large piece, but before giving one to me, he began to hesitate, and very slowly selected a piece for me, so that I began to fear and think he did not want to give me Antidoron. Mentally, I begged God that he would not deprive me of it. Finally, he selected a piece and gave it to me. Then he blessed us, made us drink some holy water, and we left. 2. A holy elder in full tradition. Soon I again visited the bishop, but this time alone. At that time I was offered a position to work in a children's home in Montgeron, because I was seeking employment and a place where I could stay with my nephew, who was entrusted to my guardianship. I did not particularly want to go there, where children were kept under a very rigid surveillance, but I had no other alternative. Besides, the lady who worked there before me already left the job. Thus I wanted from the bishop only a blessing to go to Montgeron, but in actuality I was drawn to him in my heart. Having arrived in Versailles at this place, I was conducted to his cell. He lived in a small room, whose walls were all covered with wooden gratings of little boxes, which were filled with bundles of letters tied with strings, and under each box there was a number. Near the window, next to a small table, there was a rather deep armchair, in which he sat facing the window. In the corner by the door there was a large bag with dry prosperas. When I came in, he got up, came up to me, and blessed me, and I began to talk to him. I said, "Your Eminence, bless me to accept the job at Montgeron and go there to live." I was sure that he would bless, but he thought for a while and answered, "No, it is better to go to Chalifert." He then began to look for something in his little address book. I stood there thinking that I had never even heard of this Chalifert, and did not pay any attention to his words. During the time of this conversation, the poor man was standing, and I did not even think of asking him to sit down in his armchair. I only now remembered about it. He gave me many pieces of advice, and after that he would appear to me several times in my dreams, telling me what to do. And all that he told me came true, as if he had known all beforehand. Then I did not fully realize that he had a gift of clairvoyance from God. He apparently hid it so humbly and unnoticeably that we who came to him would not guess about it, because at that time I was not amazed even at the following. I met Blessed John in 1958, and my father died on May 7th, 1957, on Bright Wednesday. Not long before that, my father had said, "Today some monk visited me. He was short in stature, all in black." I thought for a long time, who could it have been? But since at that time I did not know Blessed John, I did not solve that question. Now at Blessed John's, I thought, what a pity that I did not know him then when my father was sick. He would have prayed him back to health. At this moment he said to me, "You know, I visited your father in the hospital." At this time he opened up his little address book to a certain page and read aloud the name, patronymic, and last name of my father, saying, "Here, I found it, Basil Maximovitch Julim." But he did not even know my last name. How could he even know and read my thoughts, if he were not clairvoyant? That meant that my father was destined not to get well. Before leaving, I asked him to give me a prospera. He began to dig in the sack with the dry prosperas, finally selected one of the 9 orders, and gave it to me. He also blessed me with the paper icon of the Lesna Mother of God. At that time I still did not know about the Lesna convent. Then he took me to church, gave me holy water to drink, and said that he must go to Paris. I became overjoyed, thinking that I would go together with him. He walked very fast, and I thought that he perhaps did not want me to go with him. Nevertheless, I tried not to lag behind him too far. When he came to the stop, the taxi still was not there. He blessed me, but then the taxi arrived. But when the taxi arrived, it turned out that there was only 1 seat left. He asked me if I was in a hurry. I, of course, said I was not. Then he sat down and kept blessing me for a long time, until the taxi disappeared from sight. The following day, I went to see Matushka Solodovnikova, and she showed me a photograph saying, "Why don't you go to Chalifert?" She told me that it was a Russian children's home, which was under the patronage of Archbishop John. I at once liked the description of this home, but what could I do? To refuse accepting the job in Montgeron, when the position was vacant and no one to replace me, was not right. With a heavy heart I walked that Sunday to meet the lady to whom I had to promise that I would go to Montgeron. So I came, greeted the lady, trying to smile, and said, "I accept your offer." I saw that the lady was not too happy, so I asked what was the matter. She told me that the woman who worked there before had suddenly changed her mind and wanted the job back. Glory be to God! With what joy I crossed myself, as if a heavy stone had been taken off my shoulders. Thus I went to Chalifert according to the words of Blessed John. 3. St. John of Kronstadt. Here is how my nephew was given to me. Still before my meeting Blessed John, I saw a dream. It seemed as if I was standing in a large church and saw somebody's sepulchre, and I knew in my mind that this was the sarcophagus of the righteous John of Kronstadt. And suddenly I saw Father John getting up from his coffin. Having gotten up, he quickly went and hid himself behind a column. Everybody around there began to shout, "Where is Father John?" They did not know that he was alive, and I ran behind the column and looked at him. He asked me what I wanted, not openly, but as if with his eyes, and I answered, "Father John, bless me." He blessed me, and I woke up. At once I remembered that I still wanted him to bless my family, because a long time ago Father John blessed my mother to go to a monastery. She wanted very much to go into his convent on Karpovka, but then she met my father, and soon they decided to get married. My father went to Kronstadt to get the blessing from Father John, and stayed there for 3 days in hope of seeing him, but returned not having seen him. Perhaps Father John did not want to bless this marriage because just previously he had blessed Mother for monasticism. Mother often would even joke, saying, "Our family is an unblessed one." This often upset me, and I wanted Father John to bless our family, and soon I fell asleep again, and saw that it was as if Father John was sitting on a sofa, and myself next to him, and I was imploring him, "Batushka John, bless our family." He smiled and blessed. Then I decided to ask him to bless me to go to a monastery, but then I saw that he did not want to do it, and he said to me, not using language, but again with his eyes as it were, "For his sake you must remain here." And he pointed to the wall, and I saw how out of this wall there gradually emerged an infant. I began to cry bitter tears and woke up. Soon the wife of my brother gave birth to a baby boy and became sick with tuberculosis, and I was given my nephew to bring him up when he was still not even a month old. These dreams I saw before the canonization of righteous John. So I went to Schalafair and was very happy living there with him. But that was the best time in my life. But then came a big temptation. My mother, for some strange reason, began to call me all the time to go back home. She would insist, "Come back, it is very difficult for me without you." She would even call me on the telephone practically every day. I asked Blessed John what to do, and he answered, "Better stay." Then I still did not know that one should be absolutely attentive to Blessed John, as to one of the Optina elders, who were receptive to God's will directly. But because I was brought up in complete obedience to my parents, I went home. As soon as I arrived, Mother said, "Why did you come?" But it was too late. I could not go back again. My place was already taken. So I had to submit myself to the will of God. But from that time on, such trouble assailed me that, if it were not for Blessed John's prayers, I for certain would have not endured at all. At approximately that time, Blessed John began at our church free trapeza meals after services, to which I afterwards dedicated my whole life. He was a holy man, and I treasured every minute of my association with him. At times it would happen that he would come down to have tea, and I, busy all day long, would then have a chance to ask him many questions which had arisen and gathered in my mind during the day. But I would forget what the questions were. Then he, sitting quietly with his head bent low, would softly speak, as if to himself, answering all my unuttered questions. I would stand there behind him in total amazement, not daring to take a breath. Those were unforgettable moments. 4. A gift of clairvoyance from God. After my first talk with Blessed John, I tried to see him more often. I always tried to get to Lesna Convent when he would be serving there. I went there to receive Holy Communion. On the eve I read the prayer rule before communion and went to bed peacefully, thinking that tomorrow I would receive communion from Blessed John. In the morning, though, while finishing reading the prayers, I heard a commotion downstairs. It turned out that Blessed John had to go urgently to Paris. I fell into despondency from disappointment, and everything turned sour. So I decided to mentally implore Blessed John, "Take me with you, take me with you," fearing even to go downstairs since I would burst into tears before the bishop. Suddenly, I heard that someone was calling the abbess and saying to her, "Zina must urgently return home to Paris." But how, when at this early hour there is no train available? Standing there in the room behind the closed door and hearing this, I thought that my heart would burst from happiness. I was still upstairs, still waiting to be called, while pretending that I knew nothing. And how strange, I did not even for a minute think that something could have gone wrong at home. Soon they came for me. I pretended that I was very concerned and was getting ready. I came downstairs. There, around the car, the whole convent was gathered, and everybody seemed to be a bit troubled. I came to the car. There was only one free seat left, just for me. I sat down, and accompanied by everybody's singing the traveling prayer, Guardian Angel, we departed. Just think, Blessed John did not even ask me where I must get off to go home. But as for me, I was not thinking of anything except that I was happy and that I was traveling with the Blessed Man. We arrived at the church. They vested him. Then the service began. Then I received Holy Communion. Then the service ended, and he was finally divested. The people crowded around him, and he got into the car, blessed us all, and disappeared. I came home utterly happy, filled as if a bit drunk. They call it grace to overflowing. Nobody at home was expecting me. They were even surprised that I got home so quickly. What could it have been? My urgent departure from Lesna? But I did not even bother to find out. Mystically I understood, if you can call it understanding. He heard my plea and made a miracle. 5. Spiritual vigilance. While I was in the company of such a man as Blessed John, the spiritual reality of the closeness of the other world began gradually to dawn upon me. I began to be drawn closer into the realm of grace, only to experience the pain of tribulation and sorrow with ever-increasing strength. Another time I went to the convent when Blessed John was not there, but I stayed there overnight. At that time, I had a lot of temptations. That night I saw a dream. I saw that I was standing at the door of the convent's guest house and looking through the open gates and out into the street. There, Blessed John was coming into the convent. As he entered, he turned to me and said, "Watch out, be vigilant." I was startled and at once looked through the gates on the other side of the street, and I saw there 3 unclean spirits, all black, dressed in tights. One was tall and heavy, the other tall and very thin, and the third of medium height and somehow fat. All 3 had their hands in their pockets and made believe that they did not pay any attention to me. I woke up. After this dream, my temptations began to increase, and each time I had serious temptations, I heard Blessed John's voice, "Watch out, be vigilant," and every time in those terrible moments he saved me. 6. Deliverance from death. There was another remarkable incident, about which one could say that Blessed John saved me from certain death. On that particular day, because I had to go out, I looked out from the window and saw that in front of our entranceway and between 2 cars there was some strange, curious object, similar to a piece of pipe, about 1 foot long and 4 inches in diameter. It's hard for me to say exactly. What a strange thing that is, I thought, and curiosity got the best of me. Why don't I go down and just touch it with my foot, see what it is? So I began to get dressed, but then I really paid little attention to it, when all of a sudden the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was our dear bishop. What could his unexpected call bring, I thought. Blessed John came in and proceeded through the corridor into the room, not saying anything. Then he sat down in the armchair. I began to busy myself around him, not knowing what to say or do. He was silent, and I was silent. Thus he sat for about 5 minutes, and then got up, blessed me, and left. I stood there perplexed. What in the world was the meaning of all this? Then my attention was drawn back to the front window, where outside, by this time, a truck had arrived at our front door, and a group of policemen were busying themselves. Some men very carefully picked up that curious object which I just recently had wanted to touch, placed it into the vehicle, and cautiously departed. I went outside to find out what was going on. At that time in Paris there were many terrorist bombings, and that object was one of these bombs. What would have happened to me if I would have gone out and touched it with my foot as I had intended to do, but had been prevented by the inexplicable visit by our dear Blessed John, to whom my intent had been revealed? That day he surely saved my life. 7. Vareniki. Blessed John lived in a house in Paris by this time, not far from where we lived. Every day I would run there bringing food, which was prepared by Mother. He liked very much cheese dumplings, called in Ukrainian vareniki. Once Mother made these vareniki for him and placed them on our table for me to take to him. At this moment my Uncle Alex came in and looked at these vareniki in such a way that it was evident that he wanted to eat them up. Evidently he thought to himself, they would not make them for me, but for the bishop they would. And it was true that at that time we were tight with money, and whatever best food we could get, Mother would always use for the bishop. So this time I brought to him these vareniki with great joy, thinking that he would surely enjoy eating them. And what do you think he did? The holy bishop sat down at the table, ate unwillingly a little bit of other food, but would not even touch these vareniki, and no matter how much I tried to offer them to him, no matter how I pleaded with him that he should taste them, at that particular time he did not touch any of these vareniki. Evidently he felt how much my Uncle Alex wanted to eat them. 8. The suitcase. In the same house in which Blessed John had his residence, there also lived his main priest, Archimandrite Mitrophon, who originally came from the city of Voronezh, and whom Blessed John tonsured into monasticism, giving him the new monastic name of his city's patron saint, Saint Mitrophon. This good father was absolutely dedicated to Blessed John, and understood that his hierarch was a living, genuine saint, misunderstood by many churchmen simply because they did not know about real saints and how they behave.